we often look to others when it comes to healing. If we are sick, not feeling well, we think in terms of, well, I should see a doctor, see a physician's assistant or a nurse, and that makes a lot of sense. They have particular training and they're able to help us when we're not feeling well. If we know our cars aren't working the way that they're supposed to, then we know if we go to a mechanic, they'll help heal our car. If our furnace isn't working right, or air conditioning, we call someone who has an expertise in that area. So, we get the point. The idea is that when we need something healed, we need something fixed, we turn to an expert. And we have the hope, the expectation that they'll be able to fix it. Being people of faith, we also believe that God helps with healing. Sometimes provides the healing thoroughly through God's hands. We can't always understand that. It's not always as concrete as the healing, perhaps, that a doctor or a nurse offers, but we understand it in similar ways. In our third scripture passage, there is a healing that occurs, but there are some other things that are happening that we also have to pay attention to. Because if we just pay attention to how Jesus cures Bartimaeus' blindness, we miss how Bartimaeus plays a part in this. And then we might miss how that offers us a lesson in how it is that we can potentially participate in healing. So I'd ask that we might listen for the Word of God as it is found in the Gospel according to Mark. We're reading from the 10th chapter, verses 46 through 52. Now Jesus and his disciples came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet. But he cried out even louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Now Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed Jesus on the way. May God bless this reading from Holy Scripture. This is one of Jesus' miracles. He has, in other gospel writings, we see other times when he heals people. But there are some unique aspects to the story, and that's part of what we really want to focus on. Because in this particular passage, a couple of different things happen. Jesus and his disciples are in Jericho, a pretty large city. We can gather that he has been teaching. He has perhaps been performing miracles there. And so once they're finished there, he and his disciples and a large crowd, people that have been listening to him apparently, are following him out of the gate and leaving Jericho. And they encounter Bartimaeus, who as a beggar sits by the gate on the side of the road, hoping that someone will give him some alms, either being money that he can buy some food or some food itself. And so this whole big crowd is running by, and Bartimaeus yells out, "Jesus, please help me," because he believes what he's been hearing about Jesus. This person from Nazareth, a apparently is able to heal people. And he might very well be the Son of God. He refers to him in this way. And then the crowd, the people that are with Jesus, are telling him, quiet down, stop it, don't bother him. But this doesn't stop Bartimaeus. He yells even louder a second time, Jesus, help me. And we're told Jesus stops. It's important to take note what's happened here, because in this very short bit of the passage, we have an idea of what's happening in the sense of, as far as Bartimaeus goes. We know that he must have a certain level of faith if he's going to yell out to Jesus. If he didn't, if he didn't believe Jesus was capable of helping him, at least in some way, he wouldn't have even bothered. But he does. So he has this level of faith that Jesus can do something for him, heal him, make him better. He also is willing to raise his voice to get Jesus' attention. Help me, he says. And he's silenced, or they try to silence him. And we don't know why. We can't get into the heads of the people that were following Jesus. But we can imagine, sometimes we're just embarrassed when people yell out. Right? Sometimes we don't like it when somebody is asking for something when we really like that person's attention and we're afraid they're going to take their attention away from us. Sometimes, and in this case, this might have been the reason or rationale, in Jesus' time, if someone was a beggar or if someone was blind, there was the understanding that they had been cast out by God. The only reason somebody would be blind, as sick as that, or if you had a disease or an illness, was that God didn't love you, or you had done something wrong and God was punishing you. So as someone who was blind and couldn't see and had to beg in order to survive, it was as if Bartimaeus had a sign around his neck that said, God doesn't love me. And so they're saying, what? Jesus is the Son of God. He's not going to have anything to do with you. Just be quiet. But Bartimaeus doesn't have any part of that, because he knows better. He knows that God hasn't cast him out. He knows that he's no worse or no better than anybody else. He knows he happens to be blind. He has to beg, and he wants to be healed. So he raises up his voice and says, Jesus, help me. And we're told Jesus stops. And then he calls, now have Bartimaeus come over here. Have that guy come over here. Now this is a little different, because usually Jesus will go to the person who needs healing. But in this case, he calls Bartimaeus to come to him. We're told he throws off his cloak. He goes up to Jesus. Jesus says, what do you want? He says, please heal me from being blind. And Jesus says, your faith has made you well. Now you can go. And then we're told that Bartimaeus regains his sight and chooses to follow Jesus on his way. While we understand and believe that Jesus is the instrument through which this healing occurs, and we hear Jesus say, your faith has made you well, I think we have to be careful how we come to understand that. Because unfortunately, in some ways, people have heard and read this passage and have come to this understanding that, well, if you believe strong enough in something, then God will heal you. Now, we know people who believe very strongly in things and they don't get healed. Now, does that just mean that God doesn't care about them? Does that mean that, he or she just wasn't praying strong enough, their faith wasn't strong enough, they didn't get enough people on the prayer chain to pray for them? No. That's not how it works. And that's not what Jesus is saying. When Jesus says, your faith has made you well, what Jesus is referring to is the fact that, first off, Bartimaeus has enough belief, enough faith to have the hope that Jesus might actually be the Son of God and that he might be able to heal him. That's where Bartimaeus' faith starts. That's what, when Jesus says, your faith has made you well, he's had this start there. Now the second thing that Bartimaeus' faith has allowed him to do is to raise his voice and to say, hey, Jesus, come help me. Because a lot of times we won't, right? A lot of times people don't raise their voices. You know, oh, we don't want to embarrass ourselves. We don't want to make other people angry. No, I'm not going to say anything. But that's, Jesus is saying, your faith has made you well, Bartimaeus, because you shouted out. This is why, in part, you've been healed. You said what you needed. You made it known what you needed, what you wanted, what you hoped for. And what do we teach our kids? Those of us who are parents or grandparents. When they're younger, we try to guess what it is, what they want. You know, we make our best guesses. Oh, you know, maybe he has to go to the bathroom. No, it's not that. Maybe he's hungry. No, I don't know. Maybe she just wants some fresh air. We don't know. And we make our best guesses, but then we teach them, right? Use your words. Use your voice. Tell us what you want, what you need. Because you know what? None of us are mind readers. None of us are mind readers. Bartimaeus uses his voice. He recognizes that he has this power to say what he needs, and he follows through on that. Jesus, please heal me. Other people are yelling out, don't do it. Stop, be quiet. He doesn't care. You know, I have every much as right to ask for help and healing as anybody else does. You know, and you might be selfish and want all of Jesus' attention, but it doesn't matter because I need him. So I'm gonna speak up. I'm gonna yell. And then we're told that Jesus throws off his cloak, or Bartimaeus throws off his cloak. And as Mark was saying, that cloak is more than just, you know, a covering. That cloak represented what keeps him warm, what keeps him dry. It is also what he uses to catch the offerings that people give to him. So what Bartimaeus is doing, what we hear in this passage, is that he throws off that which has protected him. He throws off that which has allowed him to eat and survive. He throws off that which he believes is the only way that he's going to make it in order to take a chance on getting healed. And he gets up and he goes to Jesus. He takes action and moves to Jesus. And then in that interaction, we're told that he's healed. And Jesus says, it's your faith that's made you well. Because he wouldn't have gotten from where he was standing before Jesus if his faith hadn't moved him to yell out, throw off his cloak, and walk to meet Jesus. We know that there are illnesses that we suffer and struggle with. Personally, we do that, and we know loved ones that do that. We know people around us that struggle with illnesses, with disease. And we know that if there's going to be a chance for some healing, that people have to raise their voices and say, I need some help here. And there very well might be times in which people say, oh, you know, you don't really need help. You know, tough it out. You can hang with that a little bit longer. Sometimes other people are saying that. Sometimes we're saying that to ourselves. In this story, it's really emphasized that we need to say that out loud. We need to say that to the people who can potentially help us and heal us. We also know that it can be hard to throw off that which we have come to accustomed to be using as our protection. You know, if I stay in my house, I'll be okay. If I have the right clothes on, I'll be okay. If I take the right vitamins, I'll be okay. If I exercise and do all the things I'm supposed to, correct diet, I'll be okay. Yeah, and all that stuff helps, but it doesn't ultimately protect us. Because even people who do everything right get sick. Even people who do everything right can lose all their money. Even people who do everything right can be cast out. Jesus is saying to us, there's no in and out as far as God goes, and there are times when we have to throw off that which we think is ultimately protecting us. And we have to take a chance, and we have to act, and we have to move out. We have to step out from where we are, off from the side of the road, and go out and meet Jesus if we want to be healed. And what's true for us as individuals and for our loved ones is also true for us as a country, as a nation. There's an illness that's present. There's a sickness that's present around us. And we recognize that. We know that. We're tempted to believe that there's nothing we can do about that. We're tempted to believe that, who am I to be able to make any difference when the hate is so prevalent, when it's so strong? What difference would it make for me to do that? And part of what that shows is that our faith, our hope for a different world has become really tampered down, so we can't even see it or believe in it anymore. It also can show that maybe we've become afraid to raise our voices. Or maybe we think raising our voices won't make a difference. Or maybe we're afraid that if we raise our voices, people will say to us, no, just be quiet. Stop. I don't want to hear that anymore. Doesn't make any difference. Nobody's paying attention to you. Stop it. And Bartimaeus teaches us that sometimes when we hear those voices, or even if those voices are in us, we have to get past that and say, no, you know what? This is what I need. This is what we need. I'm going to say it a little bit louder. And sometimes then we also have to take off that which protects us. Our distance, our arm's length, keeping everything at arm's length. And say, you know what, I got to throw all that off and I got to step out and get engaged in making the world different than it is right now. Because if we don't believe that it's possible, and we're not willing to raise our voice and take action, it won't happen. That we know. Because our country hasn't always been the way that it is. And it didn't just magically happen like this. And it didn't start off one way and go another way. I went to a lecture. Ibn Patel spoke. He's a Muslim. I heard him speak at the National Youth Event about 8 years ago that the UCC put on. And he speaks about the hope that he has and the hope that he has seen develop when young people of different faiths come together and talk with each other, and when they work together, when they engage in civic activities together that show that people of different faith can work together and make a difference in the world. And so he's been doing that over the last however many 10 years or so. And it's had a real impact. And part of what he was speaking about was that sometimes when we look at our history, we don't see the whole history. We don't hear the whole story. And we think, oh, well, the United States has always been this place in which there was always freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and everybody always respected everybody, and everybody always got along. And he said, you know what, that's just not true. In fact, in our beginnings, there were places, and he mentioned up in Massachusetts in particular, in which the Puritans said, you know, you're either going to believe like we do, or we're going to banish you. You're either going to act like we do, or you're going to be gone. You're either going to do all the things we say you need to do, or perhaps we'll burn you. And they did that. Not very inclusive. But there were other voices at that same time. There were people like Roger Williams in Rhode Island who got banished from Massachusetts, who said, you know what? Everybody should have the opportunity to worship in the way that they feel as if it's appropriate. Everybody should be able to live as long as they're contributing to the common good and celebrating, that it should be celebrated, not damned. There are people like Benjamin Franklin. There were others who were raising their voices and saying, no, this should not be an exclusive enclave. We should not be creating exclusive enclave. We have a chance here in this place, on these shores, to create a place where everybody is welcome, where there is freedom of religion, where there is freedom of speech. We escaped Europe, in part, to try to make that happen. Today's Reformation Sunday. And part of what we celebrate, we think about on Reformation Sunday is that, however many years ago now that it is, Martin Luther put these theses up on a door, and it wasn't as if he wanted to create whole bunches of new denominations. He wanted to reform the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church at that time, he perceived, and he wasn't alone, that it wasn't actually being very Christ-like. It wasn't really following Jesus' words and ways. So he said, these are the ways that we can change the Catholic Church so it can be better. What grew out of that was some very different ways of worshiping, different denominations. They started dividing up. It became more and more problematic for some to survive than others, and the Puritans were not necessarily welcome in Europe anymore, so they said, we go to this new place, we can worship the way we want. But then they also decided that they wanted to worship everybody to do it like that. It's part of human nature, I guess. We all got to be the same. We all got to think the same. We all got to act the same. We all got to believe the same. But we as a country are not. We've said that's not what we envisioned. That's not what we hope for. We hope for a place which everybody can worship in the way that they want. As long as people are acting in ways in which they're being helpful and not hurtful, we're all going to participate in this together. It's working towards a common good. And this is some of the ideals that we've held up, but they don't just happen. They don't just magically occur. We can't just sit on the sidelines and wonder and watch and think, oh my gosh, things are just so horrible. What are we going to do? There's no hope. Things can never be different. They can never change. But they do. They do change. And we as people of faith can start from a place in which we have faith that God wants the world to be different. That God has longed for the world to be different since human beings were interacting with each other. And it hasn't always gone well. But God doesn't give up on us. God keeps speaking through prophets. And God comes to us in Jesus. And God speaks through other religions throughout the world, hoping that we as human beings will get it, that we're all in this together. It doesn't matter how we worship God, but it really helps if we do. That nobody's excluded and everybody's included in God's circle, and no one should go without. These are things that God has asked us to think about and make to come to be. But if we give up on that vision, if we give up on that hope or on that dream, then we don't have much to go. We don't have any place to start. We won't raise our voice. We'll sit on the side. And Jesus will walk by and nothing will happen. Or we could raise our voice. And if people tell us we shouldn't be talking about that, we shouldn't be saying that, we should be paying attention to other things, we can nod to them politely and speak a little bit louder. Because that's how things change. And it is faithful. We have to speak. And sometimes we have to speak even louder, and then we have to act. Because if we don't, what happened in Pittsburgh could happen here. Yeah, it's not so far away anymore, huh? All those hate crimes, all that stuff. It's not, it doesn't affect me, it doesn't impact me, it's way far away. This happened in Pittsburgh. And somebody decided that these people who were Jewish deserved to die because they were Jewish. Oh, and also because there were people in that neighborhood who were Jewish who were helping immigrants and migrants settle peacefully here in the United States. Well, those immigrants and migrants, well, we know, right? Because we've been told they're murderers and thieves and horrible people, so they shouldn't come here. You know what neighborhood that happened in? Squirrel Hill. You know who lives or lived in Squirrel Hill? Mr. Rogers. Yeah, my neighborhood. I didn't watch Mr. Rogers growing up, but my kids did. If there's a different vision for the world, he offered it every morning. And it wasn't a vision that was limited to one group of people or another group of people. It wasn't a vision that excluded some people just because of the way they worshiped or where they came from. And day in and day out, he raised his voice. And that had an impact. There's a whole lot of people who know Mr. Rogers, right? There's a whole lot of folks who base how they lived their lives, at least in part, on how he showed us we could. It makes a difference. But we got to believe it does. And we got to throw off the things that we hide under or that we think protect us that maybe really don't. And we got to be ready to step up and step out. Bartimaeus showed us how this could be done. We can do this. Amen.